So we learn something new every day, and thank you for the Minister of Good News to come. The final speaker in this session will be Ambassador Ducaru. Ambassador Serene Ducaru took over the post of Assistant Secretary General for Emergency Security Challenges in September 2013. He is responsible for providing support to the North Atlantic Council and for advising the Secretary General on the evolving and emerging security challenges and the potential impact on NATO security. Prior to his appointment as Assistant Secretary General, Ambassador Ducaru served as Romania's permanent representative to the North Atlantic Council from September 2006 to September 2013, and as of 2011, also as the Dean of the North Atlantic Council. Ambassador Ducaru graduated from Polytechnic Institute of Bucharest. He holds a degree of international relations from the University of Amsterdam and a PhD degree in international economics and from the Academy of Economic Studies in Bucharest. Ambassador Ducaru joined the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1993, assuming various posts such as member of the Policy Planning Team, Counselor to the Minister, Spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Director for NATO and Strategic Issues. He served as Romania's ambassador to the United States of America as its permanent representative of Romania to the United Nations in New York. So just one, before I invite Ambassador Ducaru, the closing words for this session will be given by Mr. Ido Moed, the Cyber Security Coordinator for the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Thank you. Mr. Ducaru.
Well, thank you very much indeed for this invitation to participate in this extremely prestigious and high-quality event. This offered also the possibility for me to get engaged with representatives of Israeli government, also the IT community. As you all know, Israel is one of the long-standing and valued partners of NATO, and I'm extremely pleased to be following such distinguished speakers like Chris Painter and Minister Cotovela. Although I'm coming from Romania, I'm one of the product that Minister Cotovela mentioned of the IT school of my country. I moved towards political science, and now it happens that I'm combining the two extractions and representing an international organization like NATO in this field of the new technologies and emerging challenges. And to make a really quick explanation of what the role of this division, emerging security challenges, is in NATO, let me evoke a story attributed to Professor Einstein, and it is a true story. It seems that one of the end of the year exam in fundamental physics, Professor Einstein was displaying the subjects of the exam, and one of the most let's say active and eminent students who also studied the subjects of other years reached out to the professor saying, well, Professor Einstein, maybe you've done a mistake because these subjects are exactly the same subjects that you've given to last year's exam. To which Professor Einstein gave the response, oh, no, I didn't make any mistake. These are indeed the subjects of last year. But you should not make mistakes because this year I've changed the answers. So very much like in Professor Einstein's stories, the job that I'm having as the head of the Emerging Security Challenges Division and the whole team is to come with the new answers to the same fundamental question, and that is how to best assure the defense, security and stability of allied members, but also to strengthen stability of the international community in partnerships with the network of NATO partners. And this is why we're focusing on a number of subjects such as cyber defense, energy security, counterterrorism, WND non-proliferation, and also hosting the strategic analysis capability of NATO, which is an analysis unit, and the Science for Peace and Security program. Now, coming to cyber, let me mention that just a week ago, NATO heads of state and government gathered in one of the most important and historic summits in Wales, definitely in the most complex international security context since the Cold War. And among the so many important items on the agenda, from the Ukraine crisis to threats coming on the terrorist front from ISIL, one of the important deliverables of this summit was the endorsement of the enhanced NATO cyber defense policy. Before going into what it means and what it brings as a novelty, let me give you a sense of where NATO is coming from in cyber. I would say that the first mentioning of cyber in political terms in NATO happened at the Prague summit in 2002, and this was in a context of recognition that NATO, that was running networks both at headquarters but also in commands, needs to consider this important element of cyber protection very much like the rest of the world. And it was then that an objective was sent to establish a NATO Computer Incident Response Center. But importantly enough, it was only after 2007 and the Estonia crisis, the massive disruption of services of one of the most wired country from this point of view, that NATO has come to the conclusion that it needs to address this in a much more coherent and at a policy level. So it was at the Bucharest summit in 2008 that NATO endorsed the first policy, which was a foundational policy. This is how I would call it. It was actually setting a clear sense of priorities to protect NATO's own networks. Also, it was given recommendations for nations to assure protection of their own networks, and it was actually establishing the first principles upon which to operate. Then later in 2008, we experienced the first time the use of cyber in a military operation, and this was the Georgia War in August 2008. This is why, when we had the debates in the preparation of NATO's new strategic concept that was endorsed in Lisbon 2010, it was, on the one hand, a strong recognition that cyber threats are growing in intensity and sophistication. They could reach a level where they could threaten allied security and stability, so that it was a link with the NATO raison d'etre was made for the first time. And in 2011, so a year after, NATO established the second policy on NATO's policy on cyber defense. This was a consolidation and, let's put it, centralization policy. Main priority was to establish the centralized protection of all NATO networks, from headquarters, commands, links with allies, agencies, but also it established some policy requirements that was including development of a partnership with partner nations, international organizations. It was establishing also as an objective the introduction of capability targets, defense capability targets in the cyber domain through the well-known NATO defense planning process. And now I'm coming to this moment in time, the enhanced NATO cyber defense policy that was endorsed just a week ago. There are a couple of, I would capture the novelties in this policy in three, let's say, on three layers. Number one, the link with NATO's raison d'etre, with NATO's key objectives and tasks, is now straightforward in this policy, because it states that cyber defense is now part of NATO's core task of collective defense. And it makes also a link to Article 5. Mind you, this link is also made in such a way that it leaves some, let's say, room for flexibility, political flexibility of maneuver, in the sense that allies have decided that there is benefit in keeping ambiguity as to when and how such Article 5 would be introduced. So there's no issue of automaticity or predefined threshold. Any Article 5 discussion is a political discussion, and any decision is made by the allies on a case-by-case basis. And the same ambiguity is also kept vis-à-vis the responses. So there's no, let's say, assumptions on how this would be applied. This doesn't mean that NATO, due to this, would jump into a kinetic response to any cyber attack, but there's also no exclusion of any means. This could be responsive through cyber means or political means or any other means, without understanding that there's any attempt towards going kinetic on cyber, as some would try to sometimes go beyond the existing context. So this is the one important thing: the link with the alliance essence and tasks. The alliance has actually three core tasks. One is collective defense, and Article 5. The other one is crisis management, and the next one is cooperative security through partnerships. In order to achieve also the crisis management objectives, we are very conscious that we have to make sure that all our capabilities of any implications any implication in such events benefit from cyber protection. And we also understand that through the cooperative diplomacy we can have increased interaction with partners, including in this domain. The other layer that I think is worth to mention, that is focused on capability development. So capability development, focus number one, is to continuous refine and strengthen this centralized protection of NATO networks that are now covering about 52 sites. It also includes for the future deployable networks for operations. It also implies that there will be refinement of capability targets for allies through the defense planning process in such a way that we bring cyber defenses of every ally at a higher level, and we reduce vulnerability across the alliance. We also have in front of us work to complete on establishing the minimum requirements for those national systems upon which NATO systems depend in performing their core tasks. And those have really high requirements, needs to be considered and to be implemented. Also on the capability side, we introduced cyber defense in the concept of smart defense. So using multinational projects from groups of allies, sometimes with allies and partners, to develop the best kind of protection. With some of the projects that I could mention would be the malware information sharing platform, the so-called MISP. Another one is having more integrated training and education system. A third one is developing capabilities such as smart sensors in groups of allies, so that the relative cost to the output makes the whole exercise more efficient and more effective in responses. More could be said in this field of capability development, but let me jump to the next layer, which means a new way of doing business in this field at NATO. And here I would start to speak about a new way of doing business within NATO. And we have streamlined the governance structure so that we eliminate the kind of stovepiping in between the work of different bodies or committees in such a way that we assure a convergence, coordination through the Cyber Defense Committee. Another element in this is the outreach, increased outreach towards partner nations, partner international organizations, and to industry through the launching of the NATO Industry Cyber Partnership. So I will end on this note, just emphasizing that NATO understands that cyber security and cyber defense, which is the mandate for NATO, it's narrower, but actually a very high, I would say, responsibility mandate for the organization. But there's a strong recognition that cyber defense is a team sport, and it's only in partnership with other organizations, with nations, with industry, and with academia that we could move on. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this, actually built upon the experience of this conference for development of future relationship with Israel and also with all the important players in the cyber defense field. Thank you very much.